In 3, 2, 1. Hey, and we're live. Matt Hunkler here, founder of Powder Keg, and this is our final keynote of the day. This keynote conversation is one I have really been looking forward to, and I think it builds really well on the themes that we've been talking about. Obviously, today, throughout the day at Powder Keg on Valley, and of course, I don't have this in presenter view, so pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. We've had an awesome action-packed day here. This morning, kicking off with Gary Vaynerchuk, who started an office in Chattanooga before Unvalley was cool, before Rise of the Rest, before the Mighty Middle, making early bets on that. Well, now we've got an awesome conversation to close out the day because one of the biggest acquisitions in the history of Indianapolis happened just a few months ago with a really exciting company that's been with the Powder Keg community since the very beginning. So I'm really excited to have Brian Powers, who's the head of digital acceptance at Ironclad, founder and CEO of PactSafe, based in Indianapolis. He is a multi-venture entrepreneur with deep experience as an attorney. He actually filed the original article of incorporation for us at Powder Keg over a decade ago. So he is a true community player. And of course, PactSafe, the contract acceptance platform that recently sold to Ironclad, where he now works in digital acceptance. And then next up, we have Jason Boehmig, who is the CEO at Ironclad, which is a California-based company. It's based in the Bay Area. And Jason is a California licensed attorney and previously worked at Fenwick & West, where he helped the firm roll out new technology initiatives. And of course, Ironclad, you've probably heard of it, but it's trusted by innovators like L'Oreal, Staples, MasterCard, and it is the only platform flexible enough to handle every type of contract workflow. Super cool company, super cool culture, and two really great entrepreneurs that I'm excited to have here today. Welcome to Powder Keg on Valley, Brian and Jason, and thanks for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Matt.
It's fun.
Absolutely. And for those tuning in, be sure to be on the stage section of the chat on the right so we can follow along. Say hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Feel free to drop your LinkedIn if you want. And then I just want to call attention again to the Q&A section. So if you click on stage, there's chat, there's polls, there's Q&A. You can chat it up, say hello, build on the conversation. I might shout you out. Q&A is where you can ask questions of Brian and Jason. But I'm going to dive right into the story now because I want to hear Jason's side of the story. Because Brian, I got to catch up with Brian just before the announcement of the acquisition of PactSafe by Ironclad. But Jason, I was curious of what your first memory of PactSafe was coming across your radar.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like Brian and I connected, which I'm sure we'll talk about here, and we talked about the fact that for months and maybe even years before we actually spoke to each other, we'd kind of been on each other's minds as companies. And our space started as a niche. We started selling to legal operations professionals, which wasn't a job 10 years ago. And there's probably a handful of companies that are well known in legal operations communities. And I love to stay in touch with that pulse of the market. PactSafe was one of the only companies I'd ever heard that had a good reputation besides Ironclad in the legal operations community. And the products, as I'm sure we'll probably talk about, were so complementary to one another that I just kept, at the beginning, it might be every few months thinking of PactSafe and being like, it'd be so cool to work with them. Maybe we can partner with them. Maybe we can do something. And then it started being like every couple of weeks. And then it was like, I'm thinking about this every night before I fall asleep. I got to figure out a way to reach out because the convergence was just so strong. So I don't know if there was a particular moment when I first heard about PactSafe, but it was with increasing frequency over kind of a multi-year period.
Well, and I maybe take for granted that people understand what digital acceptance mean, but we're users of PactSafe. I've used it for a long time, so I'm very familiar with it. But maybe Brian and Jason, you could kind of explain what PactSafe is versus Ironclad, and obviously it's now all in one product. But what is the product of Ironclad and digital acceptance for those who maybe are new to that?
Yeah, I could jump in with the first part of that, which is like just setting the
Yeah.
stage for what we're working on collectively, which is the business contract. I mean, every company around the world makes business contracts, right? And it's kind of crazy that we all do that through this really patchwork process of maybe downloading something in Microsoft Word and like uploading it to HelloSign or DocuSign or Adobe Sign. And then like, if you're going to try to actually keep track of it, which you probably should do if you're a business, you maybe enter it in a spreadsheet or a database of some sort and hope that people that leave your company, for instance, actually update that database before they go. And then, of course, Brian and I are both attorneys, so there's a whole bunch of legal work that's built on that foundation as well. So the fundamental problem is the business contract. And then we at Ironclad had built the almost like architecture for taking a contract from the start of that process, the idea of a contract, all the way through to the end of it. And there was a big piece of that that maybe I'll hand it to Brian to talk about that we deliberately hadn't built. And that's where just this kind of natural idea started to come from.
Yeah. So what we built, like PackSafe started out just as a platform, an API that would plug into every place where people are checking a box, clicking a button to accept terms when they buy a couch, when they sign up for a new SaaS product, when they download a mobile app, right? Those are click wrap agreements. And where we saw our business and product evolving was, hey, like that type of contract acceptance is something that more and more businesses need, they want, right? Every business is trying to gravitate to how do we create a better experience for our customers, even like big B2B companies like CDW or Dell, some of our biggest customers. And so we had started evolving like what we had built to be like this end-to-end solution for any business that wanted to take their contracts, inject the acceptance point into some carefully designed, experience for the customer. And so that's what we were laser focused on, right? Just like super fast, super seamless acceptance of contracts that were part of some other experience. And, to this day, nobody else on the planet does that, right? It's a lot of people talk about e-signature and all sorts of stuff like that. But, we built the first platform that actually empowered a business to take a contract and have it accepted at massive scale inside of some other experience. And we've done we're creeping up to it, but, almost 1 billion contracts like that, right? It's a lot.
That's crazy. I didn't realize you're coming up to the 1 billion mark. That's amazing. Congrats.
Yeah. The wild thing about that 1 billion mark is that's still really small.
Yeah.
Like, if you think about the amount of contracts that are out there in the world, the Ironclad PackSafe combo is still only addressing a very small percentage of them, even at that scale.
I love the we're only scratching the surface of the opportunity there behind that, because I agree that, there's just still a crazy amount of paperwork, literally paperwork still somehow that's happening that just still needs to be digitized and made a lot freaking easier. I wonder, Brian, what your original memory is, because sometimes it's different when you're the smaller startup or the newer kid on the block. What was your earliest memory of Ironclad or Jason?
So this is where the actual origin story gets kind of funny. Similar, way back to an event that there's this legal ops event called Clock, right? And it's always out in Vegas. And Ironclad was a few stages ahead of us. So they had a really nice booth there. They were doing all this entertainment, like having parties. PackSafe was just me and one other guy, Kyle, went out and we were, shooting the shit with people and trying to figure out what was going on. And I remember I knew about Ironclad and walked up to their booth and was looking at the words they use and the collateral they had, and was just like, holy crap, like they think exactly the same way we do, but they're solving a completely different problem. Like, it's both related to contracts, but but it struck me, and I always remembered that. I also tried to get into one of their parties, and I got rejected. And so I reached out to Jason on LinkedIn. This is in 2017. Sent a really nice message about, oh, we use all the same words. Like, I think we're really aligned. Like, the vision seemed very, very related. Like, we should get together. I'm out here. And he didn't respond to that until he reached out to me in December to start these discussions. So I get a LinkedIn message from Jason. It was like early December. And, he led with, oh my God, I can't believe it took me 3 years to respond to this, but I think you're right. We should talk. But I think that was so I think, we both recognized very early on from afar that there was just a lot of overlap in the way that we see the world that, we're trying to change. Right. So it all started there. Someday I'll get into an Ironclad party, but
you're hosting now.
Not if you're in that Gumby costume. So that's an inside joke. Sorry, hundreds of people watching this. I'm super curious to hear what it was like, that kind of initial conversations, because I know, Brian, you weren't necessarily looking to sell. You weren't, trying to get rid of PackSafe, because you obviously also feel like you're just scratching the surface of what you're doing. You've been adding people, building momentum. What was your initial response to that? And what is it that ultimately helped you decide that, yeah, it does make sense to join these two companies into a bigger opportunity?
Well, I'll give my perspective there real quick, Jason, and then you can give yours. But the conversation didn't start there, right? It was, hey, like, we really should get to know each other, get to know our businesses, because like, it's clear that we take a different approach to solving, different problems, but same worldview. And, at the time, our business was growing. Like, we had Series B term sheets in hand, right? Like literally there was one that I would have signed, but there was a mistake on the cap table they attached to it. When I sent it back to him, Jason reached out the next day. So talk about crazy timing, but like we were very excited about like the opportunity, how much we were growing, raising more money, like just super pumped. No desire really to sell the business, to do any sort of business combination at that time. And there were other opportunities for us to do that. But, over the course of like, what was it, probably 4 or 5 days, Jason and I had a lot of conversations that very quickly just evolved into, and I think it was like an 11 p.m. call I had from Jason. Like, is there, like, maybe we should just go into business together, and we should acquire you guys, and we should go tackle this problem like together. And I was like, I think you're right.
Yeah.
That's the way it happened. I mean, right? It was.
Yeah. I don't think either of us were approaching that first call of thinking, hey, let's send a LinkedIn message and do an acquisition here. It was more like, we're aware of each other and there's so much potential that we should just have a call and figure out what that potential is. And then the circumstances and what we learned in those initial calls led us to think, wow, this is pretty crazy, but we should probably think about this. We were not thinking of doing an acquisition at that stage of our life cycle, and pretty big percent of the company, if you think about it. Like, I think, probably when we started discussions, maybe 20% of the headcount of Ironclad, which is pretty meaty. And I remember having an early discussion with the board member, and they're like, you probably shouldn't do that. That's huge. And acquisitions can be a nightmare. So, but we just felt there was so many overlaps and so many kind of natural avenues of collaboration, both within the product and the teams, that I think we were almost kept being surprised that we were getting through the next gate. Well, it's like, well, we probably shouldn't do this, but let's just see if we could get there. Oh, there's a fundraising event going on, so maybe it makes sense to actually think about the economics of stuff. And the teams are like really similar. Oh, we want to open a Midwest hub anyways. So and there's a great indie presence, and we just kept getting farther and farther to the point we wound up at the point of a term sheet or an acquisition, and it was all kind of making sense. So very lucky.
Very lucky. Sounds like you both created your own luck on this one. Why did Ironclad want to start a Midwest hub?
There's just a lot of advantages to being in the Midwest. We have always had a very thoughtful approach to our physical locations. And for a while, perhaps in a bit of a contrarian way in Silicon Valley, we were 100% San Francisco. And it's only when we had enough gravitational pull from East Coast customers and support that we had to open a New York office. And at that point, we decided to go all in. And it's a first-class hub in New York. And so for a while, we were just San Francisco and New York. And then the Midwest is the traditional way of thinking about it out in the Valley, I think, is it's a lower cost place of doing business. I think it's just as much of a business hub as San Francisco and New York. Perhaps the boundaries of it are a little bit bigger, but there's the talents there now, the business opportunities are there, the customers are there. We wanted to really invest in that in a first-class way and not we'll open a back office type of way. And we were in the process of evaluating a couple different places. And I think one of the great things about this was we discovered and are able to invest further in Indy, which has been even better than expected so far.
Well, tell me more about that. You don't have to share any proprietary information, but how are you looking to invest in the middle of the country and this office here in the Midwest?
Well, speaking from my perspective, Indy seems to have a real competitive advantage in B2B SaaS. Obviously, like there's the exact target DNA, there's the Salesforce DNA, but that's a pretty specialized area of the technology world. And San Francisco has been dominant there, but to see, and PackSafe team is a great example of this, where you've got a number of folks on the team who have encountered and worked in the B2B SaaS area before and are bringing that expertise and experience to us while being seated in Indianapolis. So that's probably the big differentiator in my mind in terms of Indy and maybe the other couple Midwest hubs that are out there, like a Chicago or something.
What are your thoughts on that, Brian, just in terms of the next couple years, in terms of how to invest in the Indianapolis ecosystem and maybe Midwest Unvalley ecosystem at large? What are the opportunities you're seeing?
Yeah, so kind of in the context of like how like this relationship happened and how we were thinking about things really even 3 months ago, 2 months ago, and 1 month ago. And now, one of the things that we talked a little bit about, Indianapolis could be a very important part of the overall growth strategy to Ironclad, right? And that was obviously important to us. But what was fascinating to me about Ironclad in the way Jason and his team had built Ironclad to date was, in the Midwest, we like to talk about, we build fundamentally sound businesses. We look at the numbers. We try to earn a profit, right? We pay attention to more than just like vanity SaaS metrics. And it was clear to me from day one, talking to Jason, and then the more I got to know the rest of the team, that this was also how like Ironclad was approaching building a massive business, which is somewhat unique, right? Because it's public knowledge. We're a very well capitalized company backed by some of the best venture capitalists in the world, but it's a very, very fundamentally sound and well run business And that was really, really important to us. And so I think when, then once we started doing business together, right after the merger, and started talking about, well, what does this start to look like? Talking about, well, there might be some advantages to actually, building certain teams in the Midwest versus here and there. And right away, it was just like, yeah, well, that makes a ton of business sense, So honestly, it's one of the primary reasons why, both sides, when you evaluate an acquisition like this, you have things that you're looking at and gates that you have to get through. And one of the ones for us was, is this a business that also shares like our desire to build a real business, right? Not just based on vanity metrics and it really is like, this is a business that is built to last and for maybe hundreds of years, right? And that was important to us because I was never myself, Eric, Adam, the rest of the founding team at PackSafe, it was never an exit minded type business, right? We wanted to build something real. And so that was really important to us. And I think that's reflected now, even in the fact that, we're having real discussions about, what type of team are we going to build in the Midwest, and how is that advantageous to the overall growth strategy in the entire company. And I think especially for a business at this stage, it was really impressive to me, and a big reason why we were like, okay, because if this was a deal where it's like, hey, we just want your tech, we're going to leave you here for 2 years, and then we're going to go build things off in Silicon Valley, then we wouldn't have done the deal, right? But this is a real business.
I do think the Midwest mindset's something we identified in common pretty early on, and was a cultural match between the companies, even though we are a Silicon Valley, or historically have been a Silicon Valley company. We've had more of a Midwest mindset, and the economics and long-term sustainability and what matters. And so I think the best of both worlds is happening, where we have the ability to make really bold, ambitious bets and the resources and capital and investors to do that, but also the long-term thinking and practicality of the more Midwest mindset. And I say that Midwest mindset with pride as someone who grew up in Pittsburgh and went to law school at Notre Dame. So I think it's a great thing.
Well, I love the Midwest ties and the Unvalley ties to Pittsburgh. We had a few speakers from Pittsburgh earlier today doing awesome things in the Pittsburgh tech scene.
Cool.
What would you, if you were to kind of distill that down, Jason, what are some of those values? If you were to try to describe the quote unquote Midwest values or those sort of Unvalley values that you bring to obviously a Valley-based business, what are some of those things that maybe would differentiate Ironclad from some of the other Bay Area-based companies?
Well, so the Ironclad values, which I think at their core are quite Midwest, are one of them's integrity. And if I think back to the deal, there were so many moments where Brian and I were like, okay, we're effectively handshaking on this, and the other person's really in a position to mess this up, but you are placing your trust in the person in a not contractual way. And that's certainly a part of our culture. And I think it's part of the culture that got the deal done as well. There's a couple other ones. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that though, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back. I mean, that's always been one of our, the pillars of our culture at PackSafe was always trust, right? Everything starts and ends with that, right? If you don't have that, what's the point of working with anybody, right? There was clearly a lot of overlap in between what we thought was important from a cultural perspective, mission, vision, values, and then, what we saw from Ironclad. And we litmus test that as well. Like, we went through, before we even got to term sheet, like we did a bunch of meetings between exec teams, and like we wanted to, like, we're like, okay, this almost seems too good of a fit. Like, there's too much alignment in terms of vision, cultural stuff, values. So, we tried to litmus test it the best we could by getting people in virtual rooms and talking. And obviously we got to a comfort point where it was like, this could really work. And like I said before, like, one of the things that we, were not interested in, was building a business in a different way, right? Without sustainability in mind. And we always talked about, sustainable growth as being like our approach to building the business, raising capital, not raising capital at the expense of sustainability. But that's just one example, right? Like, it was just, there's so many things that we thought that we would love about Ironclad. Now, 2 months in, right? Like, all of those have been more than validated. Like, it's actually going better than I think we thought it would. Like, we all thought it would go great, but like all of this stuff that we're talking about, as we're reflecting back on early deal stuff and like Midwest values, the culture, all that, like, it's for real. It's actually really refreshing.
Yeah. Another one of those shared values that I think I've seen on both teams that I associate with the Midwest, and how I grew up, is kind of drive. Integrity is one of our values. Drive is another one, which means we want to be the best in the world at what we do. And that kind of goes back to just little things. It doesn't mean like you have to be the most praised technology company, but you take an attitude of whatever you're doing, you're going to do it to the best of your possible ability, and you're going to aspire to be the best in the world. That even goes to people on the teams on both sides. Like, one of my first jobs was cleaning bathrooms at like the local kind of supermarket. And I really did want to clean the bathroom better than anyone else. And I know there's actually folks like on the PackSafe team as well that have a really similar story of whatever we're doing, we're going to do it really great. And you kind of see that come across in the preparation of, we celebrate closing a deal, but we also celebrate when we do a really great job preparing for the meeting and we're the best prepared company, because closing a deal is actually a little bit out of our hands, but being the best prepared for the meeting and running it the most effectively, and like taking that extra few minutes to craft that pitch or the proposal, or put a little bit of a personal touch on it. That's the stuff we're in control of, and we can be proud of no matter what the outcome is. So I think that's Midwest.
Yeah, absolutely is. Well, and Drive obviously has so many other meanings here in the Midwest with Detroit and Indy 500, and
we live in that value in another way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I love hearing Drive as a core value for a company that is, sometimes people don't equate sustainability with Drive. And I think it's a really interesting balance that you've been able to create this exceptional company, balancing both this sustainability mindset, which of course is supported by a lot of great funding from a lot of great backers, but then also it's growth. You're driving that business up into the right.
Yeah. Well, and I will say, like, we talk about Midwest values, and those are super important, right? But like, one thing that has been super refreshing and awesome for us is like there's a little bit more swagger in our step. Like, and when I say I mean the people that came to Ironclad from PackSafe. There's a lot of good things to like, the Valley mentality, right? And like, we figured out how to. Ironclad had already figured this out, as I've already said, but like that growth mentality, that like belief that, hey, we can go out and we can build a company that could be, just massive and change the world, right? we had a big vision at PackSafe, right? But it wasn't that big, right? It was big, but like I was not talking about stuff like that. Like we were passionate about what we did. We had a vision. It was not that big of a vision. And what's been really, really awesome about Ironclad is like now we're a part of something like that. And I think that is something that is inherently like Bay Area mentality, right? Not that you can't, not that we don't create transformational, like world-changing businesses in the Midwest, but like setting out to do that, I think comes faster and more naturally in the Bay Area. And so we could use a lot more of that in the Midwest, which is what's exciting to me about continuing to build this business here is like we can start, like we can help people in the Midwest understand like you can do this here, right? It's a harder leap than you would think to make, you know?
Yeah.
And it's been really, really exciting, refreshing, like just being a part of something like that. But always balanced with that sustainable growth concept, you know? It's pretty rare, but it's really, really exciting.
Well, I think you hit on something that makes me think of our opening keynote earlier this morning with Gary Vaynerchuk, where we talked about, unvalley doesn't mean anti-valley. Yeah. It means not trying to be exactly like exactly like Silicon Valley, being our own thing. Indianapolis is its own unique tech ecosystem, just as Nashville is, just as Louisville is, just as Charlotte, Miami, Austin, et cetera. But I think that's what's wonderful about the internet and about tech culture today is it's in the cloud. It is the unbundling of Silicon Valley. It's how do we take those things that we like, that growth mentality, we can be a unicorn, and not just a unicorn, but a deca unicorn, and start that in a place like Indianapolis or Pittsburgh or, insert your favorite city here. And I'm talking to you people in the chat there on the other side of the screen. I do want to encourage you again to feel free to pop a question into Q&A. I've got plenty of questions here that I can talk all day. I can do this all day, but this is part of the community piece and part of that connectivity that I think Brian and Jason are both talking about. The more we can kind of create a better connected ecosystem. And that's one of the things the more we talk, the more I love about Ironclad, just that you are planting these flags in not just either coast, but in the middle of the country as well. And trying to create better connectivity with your own organization, with the rest of the world. And that I do think that that's exceptional and unique. Was there anything surprising to you, Jason? I know it's only been a couple of months here. But have there been any things that have surprised you, whether it's in a delightful way or in a, wow, I didn't know Brian did that kind of way, or, what?
Other than Gumby?
Yeah, other than Gumby. You want to tell that story? I'd love to hear your version of it, because all I saw from Brian was a screenshot.
Brian's got
lots of screenshots as me as Gumby, but.
Yeah, right. So Gumby shows up. No, actually, that's been really fun. I mean, I think Brian showing up in a Gumby costume is actually a great example of how I think these things go well, because, at the end of the day, we're building big stuff and we're serious business people and we are stewards of capital, and but we're also, it's good business to have some fun while you're doing it. It's good business, and it's just good life principles. Like, life is about more than the economics. We have a duty on the economics, but it's been fun to just like get to know a new group of people and have them feel comfortable coming to a meeting in a Gumby costume without running it by anyone. I love that. And we want more of that, and more of these like fun at work and people bringing them full selves. And Brian's full self involves a Gumby costume. I love that. So yeah. I think it's just been cool to get to see that from a new group of teammates, and like those part of the cultures kind of start to merge.
That's cool. That's cool. I think that's the other thing I've just, after doing a lot of interviews of integrations of cultures, I mean, I think it comes down to ultimately the CEO to be, are we going to embrace that culture and say, hey, we can kind of merge and blend, or no, it needs to stay the same and you need to conform to us. And this is, so I want to call that out too, Jason, just because I think that's pretty unique as far as integrations go, which I don't have data to back this up, but I would say more often than not, they don't go super well.
No, I think that's true.
Yeah.
But I think it really comes down to, if I had to take away one lesson from this process, it's like the CEOs really have to kind of just connect on a pretty natural vision for how this goes and feel comfortable going forward, because Brian's been just like this wouldn't have happened without Brian's leadership, both pre and post acquisition. You're setting an example when you, by the way you show up every day, and Brian's like really done a great job of leading the teams on that front.
I believe it. Brian, anything surprised you about the acquisition over the last couple of months?
Not really. I mean, it's I think it's been probably harder than we thought to get to where we want. Like because we're so excited to get it done, and then it's like, how's this going to manifest itself in ways that we're like, yes. And there's been plenty of examples of that, but I think it's really hard. Like, it's really hard to, even with all of the like incredible alignment in every way imaginable. And by the way, like, there was a pulse survey that went out to the whole company. Was it probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, Jason? And
yeah,
it was like, and we tracked, like, are you like, I think, what was the question? Like, are you happy to be an Ironclad team member?
Proud to work at Ironclad. Yeah.
Yeah. And the results were like 99%, but it was the same result for like our team, like bringing PackSafe people over and pre-existing Ironclad. And that is not normal, right? Like, we know, like, the benchmarks do not say that you should have that high level of satisfaction, because it's, we very quickly put everybody from the PackSafe team into an existing Ironclad team. And, that's hard to do, right? And, there's a lot of people putting a lot of trust in leadership when you go down that path. And we brought everybody over, right? Everybody came with us. So that number was probably the biggest surprise to me. But it's typical startup stuff, right? Like, nothing is easy. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it, right? Which is why we're all here, because we're the ones that are like, screw it, we'll do it. But that number was the biggest surprise to me. I think we were all shocked. We're like, whoa.
That is surprising. I mean, our fireside conversation with Amin Brar at JobVite right after, I mean, he drew the line, physically for us. He said there's a dip, we bottomed out, right after the, like, who's this new CEO guy? Okay, like, no, things are good. And it took a dip to get through that. Do you think that it was easier because your products were more complementary rather than competitive? There's actually a community question I'm seeing here in the chat.
So my perspective on that is, it's interesting to think about the time frames for this. And I do think that the dynamics of our products and the dynamics of competition made it easier to get done and easier to be successful than it otherwise could be. But it depends on what your time frame is. So at the moment of acquisition, our products were super complementary. Like, you basically plug it in, we're offering almost exclusively completely complementary solutions. What helped drive the acquisition, at least in my mind, in part, it'd be interesting to get your take on this, Brian, is long term, I think we would have been much more competitive because we were basically starting on the same problem, and we were working on different parts of that problem. But to solve the entire problem, each of us would have had to build the other product entirely effectively. So from that perspective, it was within the vision of the companies to build the other product, but it was not within the practicality of where that actually stood at the time of acquisition. And that was part of what made it such a strong case in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like it's we're solving very related problems, but at different ends of like the spectrum of how they're solved, right? Like for different personas, different types of contracts, whatever. But it was inevitable that we would have started doing exactly what Jason just described. And I think the more we've learned about each other's roadmaps and existing products, right, like that had already started to happen. So, but to Jason's point, like the timing of it, where we are actually at, I think has made this, it has made it easier. At least in terms of like figuring out like how do we attack the market opportunity, as opposed to trying to figure out like what you would have to do if a bigger company acquired a smaller company and you had the exact same product, right? With like 2 or 3 feature differences. We also, just not a ton of like, we had some customer overlap, right? But not a ton, right?
Yeah.
Which the fascinating part about that though is like, it's sort of the same target market, like forward thinking legal teams and tech centric type businesses. But out in the market, we'd rarely come across each other. And
same
had very
profile
few
of
customers, which is also like an exciting thing now because we have a ton of opportunity to grow a lot just within our existing base. Because now we have all sorts of shiny new things to sell to, the pre-existing customer bases.
Yeah, that's exciting. My brain kind of keeps going back to this thing that Jason said and that you kind of built on, Brian. And I think the phrase that came out in my mind is the unbundling of Silicon Valley. And we talked a lot about Midwest values, but I was wondering if we could dig a little deeper there. And obviously, Jason, you've got Midwest roots as well. What were some of the things that you got out of moving out to Silicon Valley and being a part of that culture and ecosystem out there? How did that level up your career and help with the journey of starting Ironclad?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is why I think the combination of the two is so powerful. So something the Bay Area does really well is be accepting of weirdness. And I didn't even quite really get that until I moved to the Bay Area, but it's a weird place in a way that isn't accepted in the Midwest, honestly. Like I remember my Midwest mom visiting me and there was like a dude in high heels wearing like a glitter washcloth covering his like midsection walking down the street. And I doubt you see as much of that in Indy. And there's just some weird stuff out here. And a lot of it's like just weird for the sake of being weird. But like that small percentage of weirdness that might not happen other areas like ends up being magical and game changing. And I think there's a connection between business and weirdness in the Bay Area and San Francisco particularly that is pretty unique if anywhere I've been around the globe. And that comes from obviously like the history of the Bay Area, but also like the history of the startup ecosystem out here. People think in different directions and it's okay to do, like it's socially accepted to do stuff that is maybe a little bit strange, even in a business context.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where marrying the two of those becomes really powerful, is like thinking really big and being okay doing weird stuff. But doing it in a like Midwest values type of way has what's worked for us.
Are there any ways that you can think of that individuals or companies could embrace this weirdness idea, whether they are in the Bay Area or they're in Pittsburgh? I'm trying to think of ideas outside of wearing Gumby costumes on Zoom conferences. Are Brian didn't know we were going to say this 10 times on this show. I'm wondering if there are ways that culturally startups could maybe encourage this, even if it's not around them geographically.
It's a good question. I mean, the value that I was going to say if drive and integrity are kind of like things you might associate with the Midwest, the one that we have 4 values, the one that I maybe a little bit more Bay Area is like intention or intent. And I think you both have to, being thoughtful is a good way to go about this. And so intent for us means very deliberately thinking about what we want to accomplish and what the end goal of something is. Because generally, if we agree on the end goal, we can disagree on the ways to get there, but like we're all kind of working towards the same thing at the end of the day. That's the kind of like real businessy way to talk about intent or intention. The other one is a little bit more introspective and kind of personal growth oriented. And I think that's probably the best, most actionable way to like incept that into your culture is like being vulnerable. It's like getting to investing in the personal growth journey as people and like making that okay on your team and creating that safe space for people to learn about themselves and learn about other people and not feel criticized or like that's a weird thing to be doing. So yeah, intent, intention, personal growth, some of the themes that come to mind for me.
I love that. Brian, do you have any other thoughts on how maybe the Midwest or startups or individuals in the middle of the country could potentially learn from the Valley and bring some of that, sprinkle some of that magic into what we're building here?
Well, I mean, not a whole lot different than what we've already talked about. I think I mean, things have changed quite a bit in the Midwest over the past 15 years, right? You've had a front row seat to all of that, Matt. It's the 2 probably biggest problems with the Midwest, right? In terms of like building like truly transformational tech businesses, in my opinion, were access to capital and like just daring to be super creative and go against everything and just say, screw it, we're going to build a massive business, right? The access to capital problem is taking care of itself because especially now in a pandemic, people have been closing deals like from everywhere, right? And there are tons of coastal VCs that really, really want to invest in Midwest companies now. Fun fact, Jason and I still have never met in person. Right? Yeah. I mean, what other period in history would that have ever happened? So I think one of the things that comes out of the pandemic is that, you know, the barriers to capital that we've had in the Midwest they're already breaking down, but like they're going to be gone soon. And then, you know, I think the last big hurdle there and what we can all learn from, you know, people like Jason that I already have is like, why not? Why not think bigger? Like there's no reason you can't. Thinking really, really big and transformational does not mean that you have to forego building a like sustainable, fundamentally sound business. It just doesn't, you know? And I think that too often we think that, right? You can only have one or the other. And I don't think that's the case, but that's the biggest thing, you know, is just embracing that idea and saying, you know, there's a lot of Midwest. We tend to be very humble, probably more so than we should be sometimes. And I think it's okay to ditch that.
What do you think? How do you think we would benefit if we were, I don't want to say less humble, but more confident?
I think it's once you remove whatever call it whatever you want, but you get rid of that ceiling, that barrier, and like the creativity is just going to go that much higher, right? Like your ability to think innovatively and think ahead of the rest of the world is going to change, like period. But I think you have to approach it a little bit differently, right? And sometimes you have to think just flat out, you have to think bigger. And if you open your mind to being able to do that, like as a founder or CEO, then it changes the way you approach everything. I mean, I can tell you, like just 2 months into working with the people at Ironclad, like my perception of what we built at PackSafe is drastically different, right? I'm thinking differently about it. And that was not, and we were already thinking big. We're just thinking much bigger. And it's a big world. Why not go after it all, you know? And I think that's it's something we don't, not that people in the Midwest don't, everybody thinks that way, but we can do better. I think that's something we can definitely learn from people like Jason, people, you know, from the Bay, from the Valley, whatever, right? It's not all bad.
Absolutely.
There's a lot to learn there.
My own 2 cents on that is I think personal humility is very important. And I think we have a lot of that at Ironclad, like personally humble people. I think corporate humility is not often good. And as a company, we want to do great things and talk about them, and we want to be the best and all of that kind of stuff. So that to me is the unification of the two concepts of we can aim really high and have really high standards and probably even brag about what we're doing as a company, as a group, but as individuals, we should remain humble about our own roles in that.
What are you most excited? This is a question for each of you. I'd love to know each of your answers. What are you most excited about coming out of this pandemic?
I'm actually excited to do a quarter end in the office. Like I always loved quarter end because it's just kind of chaotic and everyone's staying there and everyone's kind of celebrating together and high-fiving, and you got engineers dropping by and salespeople and customer success folks, and it feels like you actually get to, there's like completion to the quarter. Whereas here it's kind of in the remote, it's just been hard to really celebrate those moments. Like, hey, good job everyone over Zoom. I'll like air high five you. And Monday, it just kind of feels like, oh, well, back to work. So I'm really looking forward to that in-person kind of moments of celebration at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll agree with that. That's lame, but I'm really looking forward to that. Like, just really miss like seeing. I mean, I'm in our Indianapolis office right now, but it's just me and one other person hidden back there in a conference room, or maybe she left. But you miss that stuff. Personally, what I'm really looking forward to is sitting down at a crummy bar and ordering a burger and a beer, like when I'm traveling. It's like one of my favorite things. Get done with the end of the day, find a dive bar close by, order just an okay burger, some fries, and a beer right next to the bar.
Sounds pretty good to me.
Give me that.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate both of you for sharing this story with the Powder Keg community. I'm excited to continue to follow it. Obviously going back to the very earliest days of PackSafe and Brian being plugged into the Powder Keg community, it's been so cool to watch that growth story. And so now to have that be part of the Ironclad story and to continue to watch that growth there, learn from Ironclad, bring some of that magic here, but also at the same time, supporting Ironclad via its Midwest outpost now.
Yep.
And so
hub, not even an outpost.
Yeah, I like it. Good correction. I think.
Let me give you a plug, Matt. As Matt said, like I was was Matt and Verge's lawyer when I was Verge and then Powder Keg. That's how far back we go. But the part of the reason I caught the startup bug once again when I was practicing law was being around like people in the community that Matt built. So probably not sitting here on this call if I wasn't involved with that. Like maybe I think it was always in my DNA, but I don't know that I'm inspired to like start PackSafe if I was not a part of your community, Matt. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Brian, because I probably wouldn't be sitting here either if I hadn't filed articles of incorporation and actually treated it like a business back before it was a business. And
this is also true.
And thanks to everybody on this call here, those listening to it later on the podcast and on social, because it's really the community that built this whole thing. And so it's cool to watch it all culminate here. And I think I look at this as a middle chapter to a pretty long saga. Lots of cool things happening. I'm excited to see Ironclad just continue to crush it and do amazing things. Bring it full circle with Gary Vee this morning. I don't usually use the phrase "crush it," but I really do think Ironclad will continue to crush it in the industry. And I'm looking forward to partying with everybody when this all ends, but also here virtually. We're going to kick off a little happy hour here, set up some networking sessions. So before we do, I just want to say, Brian, Jason, thanks so much for being here. This was awesome.
Really appreciate you having me. Looking forward to doing it again sometime.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
All right.
For those of you still on, don't go anywhere. I got to tell you a couple things. Bye, Brian. Bye, Jason. I want to tell you a couple things about tomorrow, but also what's going on right now. So right now, you can expect to plug in at the expo. There are people still at the expo, digital expo booths. The networking button right over here on the left is a really cool way to meet people who are here in session. We literally had hundreds of connections happen during the happy hours after the events last year. So that's a great place to plug in. So please stick around and do that if you have time to do it. I'm going to go upstairs, grab a beer, and I'll be right back down here hanging out with people here in just a moment. I also want to give a huge shout out to some of our partners that made this all possible. First of all, I do want to give a huge shout out to our friends at InnovateMap. They are a product design agency that does incredible work. If you're looking for expertise in product management, design, product marketing, or brand, check out InnovateMap. They worked with a lot of the companies you heard from today. Just awesome organization. And speaking of legal, one of the best legal firms helping tech companies from fundraising to exits, ever-changing policies related to the pandemic. Taft is awesome. They've got a lot of Midwest hubs and beyond. We work with them here at Powder Keg, and we really like those guys. So definitely check them out. And again, just want to encourage you again, check out some of those expo booths, literally more than 30 startups in there, scale ups, even big organizations like Stanley Security in there. CLA are awesome partners that make this all possible. Coding academies like 1150, really cool place to plug in. Networking sessions, I'm going to turn that feature on literally as soon as I grab a beer and hopefully connect with some of you there. Thanks for tuning in to day one. Definitely make sure you're there tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern. We're going to kick things off with Anna Mason, who's a partner at Rise of the Rest, doing amazing things to invest in startups in the middle of the country. We'll see you there. Thanks, everybody.